This afternoon we're going to tie up a damselfly, and I'm hoping it all comes together towards the end. It's kind of a complicated pattern, but it's not overly complicated. And there's lots of room for mistakes, which is always good for me. So I'm just going to start with some 13-aught sheer black, or 14-aught sheer black. Just making sure that I've got a kind of a good coat on here of thread. It's probably going to do me just fine right there. So the first material we're going to tie on, and this is really good stuff. It is, I think Hairline makes it. Yeah, it's adult damsel body, which makes this a lot easier. The material looks like kind of like this, so it just comes in this roll. And what I'll do when I'm tying the pattern is against like a paper towel or something with a Sharpie, I will go ahead and put some black banding on that material so it looks more like the damselfly. You'll see we'll also be kind of melting the ends of this because it's kind of a polyester, I guess, material. And it'll fray right out on you. So we're going to start just by getting a little bit of extra staying power. I'm just going to put a dab of Z-Ment super glue. I'm going to go ahead and run my thread through that a few times so it's kind of on my thread as well. And I'll just unwrap that thread back, and now I've got kind of a little bit of a coating of super glue on my thread as well as on the thread as well as the shank of the hook. So anyway, so here's our piece that I've already burnt one end and put the black banding in place for it. So at this point what I'm going to do is just tie this in. I'm going to tie it in right about, that's going to do us just fine. And really what I'm focusing on here more than anything else is keeping this material on the top of the hook. So I'll just take a look at it as I'm working my way forward a little bit. Usually I'll start tying this in towards the kind of the very middle of the hook. I'm going to come in with some scissors and see if I can cut a little bit of that extra yarn out or polyester out. That may be a lost cause, but I'm going to give it a go. So with that, now I'm just going to work on cleaning this up a little bit. This is far too long, so I am going to just come in here with my scissors and make a cut, like so. And then I'm going to come back in, this time with my aiming flame, and we're going to go ahead and melt that end. I'll pinch it a little bit while it's still hot there. Do that once more. That feels better. So I've got the extended body going on here, and I'll break out my Sharpie because I'm going to go ahead and fill in what I just melted off and make that end black. So I'm just going to kind of hit it all the way around, turning it upside down as well, so that I can get kind of the black end here. While I'm at it, I'm also going to be putting a little bit more black on each of these bands, just so they're more pronounced. Just like so. So hopefully that's beginning to somewhat represent or look like body of a damselfly. So the next operation is I'm going to get this hackle here. I've got the full hackle feather here. You can see those the little tiny ones and the bigger ones. I'm going to actually, and I already have pulled off two of the smaller ones that I'm going to use for the wings on this fly. So each one looks, you know, something like that, in the neighborhood of that anyway. I'm going to tilt my vise, I'm sorry, but a little bit towards me. I want these wings on here, but I don't want them splayed out very far, and I want them shorter than the body. So I'm going to just place them kind of one at a time. And I'll have some room for adjustment for sure as I work on this. So I've got one tied in. I'm going to go ahead and grab my second one. We're going to tie it in similar. And we will really focus on trying to make sure that the length is right in comparison to the other one that we just put on. And again, I don't want too much of an angle on this. So I'm trying to be pretty careful about not letting this splay out too far. So now that I've got, those are not solid tied in, they're tied in enough for me to now look and see what kind of adjustments I may need to make here, especially in terms of length. I can see this one here is a little bit longer, so we're going to pull it back a little bit. And for me, that's, yeah, that's gonna work for me. So I'll just kind of put my finger here on top, just hold that in place a little bit, and just take a few more wraps up the hook to secure this, and then we can kind of sweep in with our scissors here and cut off these butt ends of the hackle. At least in theory. So I can go ahead and go over those tips now, and just, all I'm doing here is just cleaning it up a little bit, just a tiny little bit. And then I'm going to come back towards that very middle spot again. And I'll fidget, because I always do, at least somewhat with these hackle feathers. Don't want to break them, but hopefully you're starting to see the pattern there, the wings on this damselfly. So the next material we're going to turn to is some foam. I'm going to use some 3mm blue foam on this. I basically have just cut a strip that we're going to use to wrap over and be the wing case here. And the width is not too much different than the thickness on this. One thing that I did do is I do like to kind of take and cut a little bit of the material out there at the front, just so that I don't end up with quite as much material at the front. So if I can kind of cut that off trim it down to kind of a little point like I did there, that's just going to help me out in the long run a little bit. Again, I want to make sure that this is staying on top of the shank of the hook. And then we'll go ahead and bring our thread back through the foam material. So we're about right there. So next, we're going to turn to a blue hackle. And we're going to be using that for some kind of like legs that are going to be stringing out towards the back. I'm going to take that blue hackle feather, and I'm going to hold it just on a slight angle here on my side of the hook and catch that stem with a thread turn or two. And I probably also want to take a few turns back behind, so I'm going to pull all of that operation forward a little bit to allow me to get a couple of wraps behind this as well. And then we're going to come back up again to the front and just finish tying this in. And that's not going anywhere. So I'm more than happy at this point to kind of sneak in here with my scissors and cut off the excess tail, cut off some of the excess of that hackle feather. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to be going around this piece of foam. We're not doing the traditional over the shank of the hook. We're actually going to be taking this around the foam, hopefully not destroying my wings in the process. And I'm just going to take several turns here of this, trying to keep it tight. If I let go of it, I'm going to lose it all. Don't really want that to happen. So now that I've got it to about that point, I'm going to go ahead and tie that hackle feather off. We've got that taken care of. And then we're just going to kind of turn to our last step here for this particular pattern. That's going to be some dubbing. And on this one, I'll probably be using, I'll probably go ahead and use a dubbing loop. So I don't know if I've done a dubbing loop in any of my videos before. Usually I finger dub, but I'll use a tool like this. I've got several, and there are really lots of different tools you can use for creating a dubbing loop. And basically I'm going to hook this over my thread, so it's now like that, and I'm going to just let my thread drop, my bobbin drop off the far side of the fly here. Then I'm going to take my bobbin and I'm going to pass it over the top of this loop a couple of times just to secure it in place. And from there, I'll begin just tying my way back up towards the front of the hook. So the material that I'm going to use for dubbing, I'm going to use some of this ice dub. This is blue steel. This is ice dub gunmetal gray. We don't need a whole lot of it. This stuff is very stiff, as you'll be able to see very quickly. It's not like the hackle, the dubbing that probably we're used to working with. So I'll take a little bit from each pack, and then I'm just going to kind of work on blending those two colors together. All right, so now I've got my my bobbin cradle, which is going to give me this extra hand. I've got my dubbing loop here. And I'm just going to open that with my fingers, and I'm going to set this dubbing on the inside of that loop. And I may make a couple of small adjustments along the way, but it's going to look something like that. And from here, I'm going to spin that. I'm spinning this dubbing hook here, and you'll see it's tightening up, making a much tighter dubbing, which is what we're looking for. It is still pretty stringy, but we're going to start by kind of, pulling that whole operation back again while we try not to trap all these hackles in there that just are bound and determined to be trapped forever. Let's pull that further back. Starting to get out of the danger zone a little bit. I'm just grabbing my bodkin there for a second to free up a couple of those trapped fibers. We're just going to take this right up to behind the eye. That's going to do me just fine. So take my thread off of the bobbin cradle, and I'm going to basically, just like you've seen me tie other materials before, we're just going to tie over the top of this dubbing noodle. It still had some dubbing on it. We could have done more, but we didn't need to. So I've got a couple of thread wraps in front of it and behind it. And now I can just come in and cut that dubbing loop completely off from the pattern here. Just like so. And we'll try to put our dubbing hook back somewhere so I can find it ever again. Oh, and what a mess we've made. So we're nearing the end here, so I'm going to pull everything back a little bit to try to just clean up this head area a tiny bit. Just like so. With that, now I'm going to grab hold of my foam that we put on there a little bit earlier. I'm going to fold that right over the top. Go ahead and let that cinch down a little bit. With that done, I'm going to now grab my whip finisher and we're going to finish, and then we will tidy up a little bit and see how close we came. That ought to do us just fine. I'm going to come in here now with my scissors and cut my foam off here. And we are good to leave a tiny little bit of that foam right there in place as kind of a head. Let me round it a little bit with my scissors, just kind of trying to get rid of some of those really sharp looking edges. Make it look more buggy head-like. So kind of a fun pattern to tie, especially if if the damsels are kind of out and in force. You're going to want to have one of these, especially if the fish are eating on them. Fishing up in the mountains. Where else would you fish? I had a spot a good friend of mine told me about that had tiger trout. I'd never caught tiger trout before, so my son and I actually drove up to the location. We fished that evening. And that evening the damsels were coming off, and that's all they were eating. And I was so glad I had a few of these in my box. We just killed them, and tiger trout are just absolutely amazing. Maybe I'll try to find a picture and include here in the video, but it is a cool looking fish. So there you go. There's their damsel fly.